Are we going to have to deal with this for every single video I make now that I'm using this new format? I was going to do this whole silly bit that a lot of people tend to do with videos sometimes, where they pretend like, oh no, I forgot to make a video, I'm falling behind, and then rush on camera. But I just fed Astrid and Finley, and I don't want to inadvertently spook them, especially because Astrid is right there. So instead I'm wasting a whole bunch of time by explaining this thing that I ended up not doing and why I didn't end up doing it. So instead I'm wasting a bunch of time explaining this thing that I ended up not doing in the first place and why I decided not to do it, rather than getting to the point. And the point is Tobot v. Wild Chief. So, Tobot v. Wild Chief. I mean, I seriously can't wade through an hour and 45 minutes of footage to cut out all of the cat bits. Not again. Anyway. Tobot, really? She almost jawed the laptop off the desk. So finally getting right to the point, Tobot v. Wild Chief. This is one of 3 new Tobot v figures that I've been seeing popping up on eBay and Gmarket and also YouTube, obviously. It's an interesting trio of figures. Don't know all their names. I only know the name of this one because this is the one I've got. But there's Wild Chief, which is a kind of red SUV, Humvee utility vehicle kind of thing. There's a blue sports car, which I believe is number 01, because this guy is 02. And then there's a plane of some sort that I believe is 03. And weirdly enough, the chunky utility vehicle is the one that I thought was the neatest out of all 3 of them. While I'm not as into the vehicle mode for this guy as I am with the other 2, I am super into this robot mode, and it's got a couple of really interesting aspects to it that I've been looking forward to going over. So, in order to get to all of that, we need to start talking about this vehicle mode. And this vehicle is a sort of Humvee Jeep-style utility vehicle thing, and it is pretty nicely detailed. There's a lot of nice paint going around the outside. They did that thing I love where they separate out, as I pointed to the wrong side, where they separate out the windows. They even have like a nice gray trim around the windows. They did the hinges on the doors, they did the handles. So much detail on this thing that is actually painted. I will say, I looked up reference photos, and there are some things that are not painted, like the front here, the winch, and the kind of hooks on either side. Those need to be painted. There are some kind of intake details along the hood there that aren't painted. But compared to a lot of Transformers especially, this guy's surprisingly accurate to the show model. And yeah, it's kind of a Hummer type truck, so I'm really not super excited about the vehicle mode, but it gets the job done. It's nice and chunky. It's got some nice molded details throughout. Even along the back you can see that they've got some nice color separation and detailing back there. It's kind of what I've come to expect from the Tobot V line, as opposed to like the more classic Tobot stuff, in that it's smaller, but it's got more detail to it. And I'm okay with that. I think it works out pretty well. My apologies in advance because this might be a little loud, but it does rolls pretty well. Big chunky tires with the silver rims, but then there's also this teeny little caster on the bottom there that I think is more for engineering than anything else. Like, it doesn't really need to be there to help it roll. I think they just put the wheel there so that rather than scraping, it rolls with everything else. And I will explain all of that when we get to the transformation. But yeah, it's fine for what it is. There's this roof rack along the top and this little 02 up there, and that is actually the tow key. And thank f***ing Primus, they finally went back to integrating the tow keys in the vehicle modes and the robot modes. Spoiler for the robot mode, I guess. But yes, this does away with that obnoxious thing that I hated with Tobot V's Troll and Big Trail. I hate when the tow key is necessary and doesn't have a place to go. I will say, this tow key is not necessary at all. You can start the transformation just manually, just by doing that. But it's not actually a problem because it stores somewhere, it has somewhere to go, and it's not completely ridiculous looking. It's just sitting on the roof rack, which is where you can store stuff, and it's held in by a clip, it just pops right off. You can see the little thing back there, there's the clip there, and that just clips in, holds in place, everything's cool. But it's also easy to take off because it's just one clip, so it comes right out. But I also should mention, I actually really like this toe key because it's not this huge elaborate thing that overpowers the figure. It just kind of looks like a detail on the truck when it's sitting on the top there. It is also actually made out of metal, which is pretty cool. Like, tapped against my ring, I guess, you can kind of hear it. Hopefully you can hear that. It's a metal toe key, and that's pretty cool. So it's got a nice heft to it, it feels solid, it has some place to go, and actually using it for the transformation is really simple, also unnecessary, but satisfying to do. But it's like, if you don't want to use it, you can just keep it clipped on the top there and it doesn't affect anything. So yeah, options. I like it. Alright, now let's move on to size comparison. So first, I'm going to grab the standard deluxe squad so you can see how they measure up, and as you would expect, even though Tobot V is a little bit smaller than classic Tobot stuff, it is still pretty darn big compared to Transformers. For a slightly more direct comparison, here he is with a more recent-ish Hello Carbot figure, and the reason I went with recent-ish is because the newer Hello Carbots are kind of doing a similar thing to Tobot V in that they're a little bit smaller, a little bit more detailed, so it's kind of like similar-ish approach from two different companies. Here's Wild Chief with a more classic Tobot, which is, of course, my favorite Tobot Terricle, and like I said, Tobot V stuff, a little bit smaller, but more detailed. This stuff is bigger, chunkier, but also kind of a bit softer, let's say. For another more direct, even, whatever you want to call it, comparison, here he is with another Tobot V figure, though a little bit older, only a little bit. I think this was only one, maybe two waves before Wild Chief here, but yes, here we have Tobot V Classic. So we can do Tobot V with Tobot V. And as always, here he is with the Duck Tank. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let us move on to the transformation. The transformation for Wild Chief is pretty simple. Simple, but clever. And it does do a couple of interesting things, especially for a Tobot. So, first off, in terms of the key, I already showed you how it's not necessary to start the transformation, but if you want to use it, and as silly as it is, I actually kind of do, because there's something about having the key right here, and just being able to pop it off, and there's the little... you can kind of see the slot right there, and the key just fits in there, you give it a turn, and that pops that thing out. And there's just something very pleasing about that motion. It's like the key's right there, it's not very far from where you gotta go, you can pop it right off, you can pop it right back on. The keyhole is right up there, you just pop it in and then give it a quick twist, and that satisfyingly clicks open. It just goes one click on the ratchet, and I don't know, I just really like it. Now from here, you could clip this back on here, but instead I'm going to leave it off to the side for now, because it actually goes somewhere else in robot mode, or it can. Anyway, with this open, we can now bring it down the rest of the way. And from here, there are a couple of different ways you can go. What I like doing is I like to take care of the legs first. So, since there is now room up here, these gray bits are on double hinges. So what you can do is pull up, and that will unclip them from where they're clipped in here, and then they hinge down, and then there's a little post here and a clip inside here, and that just clips in, and now it's at this angle and it's kind of pushed further back. So I do the same thing on this side, now down like that. Then we uncurl the legs. And uncurling the legs is kind of neat, because if you watch as this happens, when this comes around, these bumper sections end up becoming part of the knees. So it kind of sucks the bumpers into the legs and makes that kibble disappear. Which is very cool. It's also kind of satisfying to do because those are some pretty sturdy ratchets. And from there are these bits back here that are the feet, and those flip forward, like so. Then these will fold in. That cleans up the legs, and then you just split the legs, and I like to go out one click on the ratchets, and yeah, there we go. There's the entire lower body done. It's very simple, And like I said, if you kept the toe key in, it would just be sitting there like this. So you don't actually have to put the toe key off to the side, I just prefer to do it. Now comes the upper body, and the upper body has a lot of really interesting things going on with it. So first, there's actually a double hinge and this little kind of strut in the center mass of the body here. So you want to bring this back as far as it'll go on this hinge, the big circular one, because there's a secondary hinge up here. And when you bring this forward, there's this panel right here that this little tiny caster will push against. And this is why I think this bit exists, because this is needed to push on this panel. But by giving it that little wheel, that enables it to be where it is without like scraping on the ground when you actually transform it into vehicle mode. So you bring this down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this level so you can kind of see, and I swing this forward. But essentially by bringing this down, it starts to push up, and that panel being pushed up reveals the head. Now, you can't push the head back down when it's in this position because that caster wheel thing is inside the torso pushing up on that little plank, so you have to open it up again and then push the head back down. Yeah, it's a cool motion, and it works really fluidly. I really like that. So now, these entire wheel well sections will suck into the torso, and that will slim things up and also make room for the arms when the arms swing around. So, push those in, and then these wheels angle in to slim up the waist, and that is really cool. I like that step in the transformation, and kind of fleshes them out. Now comes the arms, and the arms are this entire back section here. So you've got the doors, the windows, that whole thing pulls back, and that will enable these little kind of swing joints down here. So this splits open, and the arms swing around, and then they push back in to lock in place so that they're not like flopping around. It's also worth noting you have to get the head revealed first before you do this bit, because if the head is pushed down, the bits that these arm joints need to slide into will not be available, and the arms just won't properly click in. So you gotta do the head first. Anyway, next you want to bring down the arms, and those just unfurl from the truck chunks along the shoulders there, and then the arms rotate forward. And lastly, these little bits up here that are the windows rotate around. Those rotate this way, and they have to rotate in this direction, like that, because if you try to rotate them the other way, there's not enough room. This butts up against that. And if you have them around this way and you try to rotate them, then it clashes up there. So you gotta rotate them around that way. And with that, Tobot v Wild Chief is, well, almost done. There is still the matter of the toe key. So, the toe key was down here. You could still leave it there if you wanted, and that would give you the O2 on the shin, but where it's supposed to clip, it's right up here on the shoulder. So that just clips in, and that gives him his kind of 02 identifier thing up on his shoulder. Speaking of shoulders, my shoulders are sore from holding that thing up in front of a camera for so long. But here we have Tobot v Wild Chief in his robot mode, and it's a pretty cool robot mode. It's like this chunky bruiser-looking guy who's made out of a truck, because he is. But it's also worth noting, he's a Tobot, obviously. But I mean, he's a Tobot, and all that that implies. So it's this big chunky robot from a big chunky vehicle. The transformation's pretty simple, but also kind of clever. And the robot mode doesn't have any meaningful kibble on it. Like, yes, there is some kibble technically, but like the wheels, they fold in to both cover up the gaps in the backs of the legs and just kind of get out of the way. There's no real back kibble. The other front wheels suck in to fill out the torso. I feel like the only real kibble this guy has is these panels from the roof rack, but like those form kind of like almost like shin guards, knee spikes or something like that, and that's actually pretty cool. He even has the entire vehicle hood for a chest, but because of the way all that mass is distributed and the way that the rest of the car is like legs and stuff like that, when you look at him from the side, it doesn't really jut out like it normally does with these kinds of designs. So even that is really cleverly done. And this is a really cool looking robot mode. Like I said, he's kind of this beefy bruiser type. But in addition to that, there's a lot of really cool detail that's revealed now. like the detailing of the forearms and the thighs. There's some really nice color separation going throughout all of that. The tops of the shoulders up here, rotating around, I'm fine with the actual engineering of that. I think, you know, it's fine, it makes sense to mix things up, but at the same time, it's a little bit plain. It's like you've got these bits when they're rotated around normally, where you've got windows and stuff, and that adds a little bit more detailing in the shoulder. But then it looks like the entire side of the car. So by rotating this around, you change things up a bit, but now you've got like visible screw holes, you've got those nice details from the windows are now rotated around to the back. I don't mind that step of transformation. I understand why it's necessary in order to put the toe key up here, but I don't know, it just makes this shoulder feel a little bit less interesting. With the paint detailing, it's very similar to what I was saying with the vehicle mode in that I looked at reference photos and the amount of paint that he's missing in robot mode is surprisingly minimal. Like, yeah, there are a couple of things here and there that I'll probably paint on my own, like these bits on the forearms here, these white bits, they're supposed to go all the way around, and they don't, which is a super small thing, but it's one example. And then primarily the rest of it is just the stuff on the front of the car, which is the same as it would be for car mode. So yeah, all in all, this guy does a really good job of representing the show model. He's only missing a few paint apps. And the ones that he is missing, they're not, I don't think, really significant. They're just like small little details. It's nothing major. The real reason I want to talk about this guy is because, as I've said many times now, and reiterated to the point where the word has lost all meaning, he's a Tobot. And I want you all to keep that in mind, because those of you who are familiar with Tobots will understand why the fact that he has articulation that is on par with, if not in some ways better than, mainline Transformers figures, like that's a big deal. That is a very big deal for a Tobot. First off, he has a ball-jointed head with a pretty good range. Like, that's pretty decent. And of course it can spin, because of course it can. The arms can go out up here. They can't, like these chunks can't swing out, but the arms can go out, so it can go a full 90 degrees. He actually has bicep swivels. As you saw with the transformation, he's got elbows, which are double jointed. They don't get as much of a curl when going around this way, but that's still really nice elbow. Like, there are some official Transformers figures that can't bend their elbow that deep. Nothing at the wrist, which is unfortunate, but it's a Tobot. Like, when has a Tobot ever had wrist articulation? There may be some. There probably are some. I may have even owned some, I don't know, but still, it's not something I expect. In addition to that, there is a thigh swivel, which is pretty decent. It can't go all the way around because of the way that this is designed. This bit kind of clashes in there, and when you're coming from the front, it clashes into the waist section as well. But I feel like that's enough to get expressive. I don't really see the need to have the thigh swivel go out any further than that. You also have the legs that go forward that far and back that far. Though the limitation with the leg moving forward is this bit right in here. So if you rotate the leg out a little bit, you can get it past that point, and that will enable you to bring the leg out a fair bit further. Then you've got the knees, which can bend. It's a double jointed knee. You basically get 90 degrees, but if you move the wheel out of the way, then you get a crap ton of bend. So that is great. Also, don't want to forget, you can go out past, yeah, you can go past a full 180 split. So there is that too. And the toes can go up and down a bit if you want. You can't really go any more forward than that. Even if you move this bit out of the way, it just isn't going to move because of how this is designed. But still, you can point the toe if you need to. I would say that in itself is really impressive for a Tobot, but this guy actually has a little bit more articulation than that. You don't actually have a waist swivel, unfortunately, because of the way this guy is designed, and I guess I can see why they wouldn't put one in. What you do have is ab crunch. You have freaking ab crunch on a Tobot figure because the way the transformation is designed. So if you wanted to, you could tilt the hips back, do that ab crunch thing. Now I've got this more heroic kind of, like, you know, posing with the chest puffed out kind of hero stance thing. It's like, you can do that with a Tobot. This is a Tobot. I know, I keep reiterating that, but this is a freaking Tobot that can do that. Aside from the lack of a waist swivel, which is disappointing, but I mean, this, as I've said many times, this is a Tobot, so missing a waist swivel is not a huge deal. Aside from that, my one real gripe when it comes to the articulation is the placement of the toe key, because it's on the shoulder, and I want to grab the shoulder up here when I rotate the arm around, which is fine, but if you look at the shoulder from this angle, you can see that the toe key hangs off down here, and there's like this little kind of gap down here. That's fine if you grab up here when you rotate the shoulder. But when I try to rotate the shoulder, I'm more inclined to grab down here, and when I do that and push, it pops the key out. And that's a really minor gripe. It is really easy to work around, you know, just grab up here, or even just use this part of the arm, because these things are sturdy, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm always automatically grabbing here, pushing down, and popping the key out, and I've got to push it back in, and it's just kind of like a small thing, very small thing, but it is worth mentioning because it is slightly annoying. Also, I just want to take a minute to appreciate that head sculpt, because it is pretty cool. It's this weird kind of car engine TV box shape with this weird jutting out forehead thing that kind of looks like it's got a radio on it. But it's still pretty cool, and there's some nice detailing in the face. I like the multiple tones going here with the white for the faceplate, the blue for the eyes, and that black kind of chin strap, but then there are also these little gold triangle bits kind of coming in from the side. Alright, now let's do some of those robot mode size comparisons. Here he is with the standard deluxe squad and, you know, Tobot V figures, so as you'd probably expect, he is quite large in comparison to them. Once again, for that slightly more modern Hello Carbot comparison, here he is with Hello Carbot's Sonar Diver, who can look pretty dynamic if you make use of the joints that he has, but Sonar Diver's articulation is a bit more on par with what you can expect from these kinds of toys. He is much more limited than Wild Chief here. Alright, after a quick adjustment, here you can see how he measures up with Terrical. And Terrical, you know, as I said, classic Tobot. Classic Tobots were bigger, but also a little bit more softer focus in terms of details and stuff like that. Yeah, he's a much bigger looking fellow because he's older and from a time when they made them simpler but bigger. And I'm smiling at the camera when the camera's not on my face. And then for one last Tobot V size comparison, here we've got Wild Chief with Classic. And Classic is taller. It's also a little bit skinnier. But another thing to consider is Classic, well, looks incredible for one thing, but also Classic has his sort of secondary tiny robot mode, which is silly, but I appreciate the fact that it's in there. So yeah, he does a little bit more than Wild Chief, but I don't care. They're both cool in their own ways. I don't even know why I'm bringing this up.
Hey everybody, I just finished recording today's video, and I just now realized I completely forgot to do any kind of preview size comparison like I've been trying to get into the habit of doing. But in fairness, I have a reason for it, even though I actually technically forgot. That reason being, I have Mastermind Creations' Eris Coulter in the mail, and she just made it to the US and will hopefully be getting through customs soon, and I want that to be my next video, assuming the figure gets here in a relatively timely manner. So, since I don't have the figure on hand to do a kind of teaser preview size comparison for, I just kind of, we're not doing a preview size comparison for this particular video, but just know my intended next video is going to be on Mastermind Creations' Eris Coulter.
And here he is with the Duck Tank. So that is going to do it for Tobot V Wild Chief. And as I've said, it's a really cool figure. While his vehicle mode is nowhere near as slick as his two buddies, the robot mode looks really cool. I really like just the chunky, powerful-looking robot that he turns into, and again, that articulation can make for some really cool display options, which is not something I'm used to with a Tobot. And I do super appreciate the fact that the toe key has a place to go in both modes. You can leave it in one spot. You could, if you wanted to, just throw it off to the side and not have to worry about it ever for anything. But because it has places to go, you don't have to toss it in a box somewhere or a drawer and hope you can remember where it is for the future. You can just keep it on him. I wish more Tobots did that. As much as I like Classic here, Classic is great. I want to reiterate that, Classic is great. As much as I love Classic, that Toki, it works out fine in his main robot mode, but in his vehicle mode and in his smaller robot mode, it just kind of gets in the way. And I've spent way too much time talking about that. So yeah, Tobot V, Wild Chief, excellent figure. If you are so inclined, I do urge you to look for this guy, whether it's on Amazon, eBay, Gmarket, whatever. Definitely worth it. And that is going to do it. So thank you everybody for watching. I do have a Patreon now, so if anyone's interested in checking that out and supporting the channel, I would absolutely appreciate it. Not necessary, but I would appreciate it. There's going to be a link in the description, and it's going to come up in the end card. And aside from that, please remember, art is more than meets the eye.